Good morning, dear students. Today we are going to analyze Thomas Hardy's poem Drummer Hodge. Drummer Hodge is considered as an elegy for a young British casualty of the Second World War, which started in 1899 and it ended in 1902. First published as The Dead Drummer in 1899, the year the war broke out. It appeared under its better-known title in Thomas Hardy's collection of poems, which is entitled Poems of the Past and the Present, which was published in 1901. Thomas Hardy first published Drummer Hodge in 1899, as I told you, during the Second World War, and after the First World War had concluded. Many of Hardy's poems take on the perspective of anonymous soldiers fighting primarily in the Boer Wars or in the First World War, for which he was still alive. Of course, the war is, as any war, it was very destructive, because over 20,000 British soldiers were killed in this war. Over 900 soldiers went missing and were never found. And it is for these soldiers that Drummer Hodge is most evocative. Now, let us read stanza 1 and then we are going to analyze it. They threw in Drummer Hodge to rest, uncoffined, just as found. His landmark is a Coptic crest that breaks the world around, and foreign constellations west, each night above his mount. There is a casual nonchalance that starts off this poem that immediately seems out of place. What does that mean? It means that when Drummer Hodge, of course he was a soldier, when he died in the war, they did not bury him in a respectful way. They just threw him, okay, like a thing, okay, as if he were not a precious, human being. When a person is put to rest, it is generally an indication that they have died. One doesn't throw in a person to their grave, generally speaking. It is done respectfully and typically mournfully. So immediately the reader knows that this isn't a typical circumstance being portrayed. The story goes on to note that there is no coffin or burial. He was buried as he was found, uncoffined, as the poet said. Hodge is buried as he was found. A kopje is a small hill that marks an otherwise flat landscape. This is his landmark. Okay? Usually a landmark on the site of a deceased individual is a tombstone or a grave marker. But here, in the case of a Drummer Hodge, there is no tombstone, there is no grave marker. There is only that Coptic crest, that small hill. Okay? Hodge has no stone. He has the open, unfamiliar sky and a small hill, and that is all he has. He is simply thrown to the ground and buried. A veldt is a rural landscape unique to southern Africa. Since the drummer is capitalized in the verse, it is likely that it is a title. This combined with the note that Hodge is being buried suggests that he had been filling the role of a war drummer in the life, apparently a popular military position that used drums for communication on battlefields. So he was not a member of a musical band. He was not an ordinary drummer, but he was a drummer in the army. Okay? Now, we see or we can surmise that Hodge was a military drummer who died in South Africa during the war. Now we come to stanza 2. Young Hodge, the drummer, never knew, fresh from Wessex home, the meaning of the word karoo, the bush, the dusty lawn, and why uprose to night view strange stars amid the gloom. From this verse we are told that Hodge lived in Wessex, and the reference to the karoo further implies the presence of these soldiers in South Africa, which suggests that Hodge was fighting in the Second Boer War. Over the course of the war, the United Kingdom fought against the South African Republic and the Orange Free States, both of whom were defeated and annexed to the British Empire. The primary focus of the verse of drummer Hodge, however, is the note that Hodge was an outsider. He was a stranger. Okay, so first, it is very important to know that he did not belong to that African land. He came from Wessex. When the poet said that he came from Wessex, this is an indication that he did not belong there. Okay? He never knew the meanings behind things like the karoo. The karoo means a notable semi-desert region of South Africa, or the patterns of the stars above the African plain. None of this was important to Hodge. He was simply there to wage war. He was a stranger, and this adds a great deal of context to Hardy's vision of the Second Boer War, because this is a noteworthy element of Hodge's last days, his isolation. Hodge is young and somewhat ignorant as well. He was a patriot, in the sense that it didn't matter to him who he was defending his country from, only that he was defending his country. It's worthy noting that it is very unusual to find a drummer boy mentioned by name. This gives the poem a uniqueness in literature of the period. Now we come to stanza 3. Yet portion of that unknown plain will Hodge forever be. His homely northern breast and brain grow to some southern tree, and strange-eyed constellation reign his stars eternally. What is interesting about that aforementioned note of ignorance is that Hodge is now forever a part of the African plain. His death and burial in the karoo means that, despite its inhospitable landscape and foreign concepts, it is now his resting place forever, as he is in an unmarked grave. It is unlikely he will be found and returned home. So, no one is going to take him home or to take his dead body home. So, he will remain there in Africa, buried in Africa forever. The second and third lines of this final verse makes reference to the decomposition of his body, suggesting that the elements of Hodge will quite literally become a part of the plain through the fertilization process that eventually aids the growth of a tree. Above his body, the strange stars that form unrecognized constellation look down on the place where he died forever. Hodge is part of South Africa now, and it is a sad ending for the poem, but also serves to give the poem a lasting impression and questions the nature of belonging. What is interesting about this poem is the lack of a clear narrator. As Hodge is dead before the poem begins, his perspective is missing, which leads to a number of questions. Did he feel that his sacrifice was worth it? Would he rather have never left his home? Why was he fighting the war to begin with? What were his reasons? By removing this perspective, Thomas Hardy leaves the poem intentionally vague, challenging the reader to contemplate their own sense of belonging instead. In this, the poem is effective and interesting, shedding light on a war older than any living person in a way that could easily be contemplated by any modern war. This is the end of our lecture today. Thank you very much, dear students, for your attention.